one of my favourite authors in education, the amazing Alex Quigley. So if you're listening live, do get involved. Send me your questions and thoughts via Podbean or all of our social media apps. Hashtag closing the gap.
Live from Abu Dhabi, this is The Breakfast Show with Kate Jones on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. So if you are listening live, please do tell me where you're listening from. So if you're listening live via the Podbean app, you can comment in there. We're also on all social media at TT Radio 2021. So what a week it's been. Very busy. We're certainly not winding down, are we? Whether you're in the UK or whether you're in an international school, it's very tough at the moment. But I have been looking forward to this all week because if you do follow me on social media or if you've read any of my books, then you will know that I am a huge fan of Alex Quigley. I've never had the opportunity to talk to him. So I'm so excited that he'll be joining us today. And I see we've got Freya who's joined us and she's listening live from Italy. So please do tell us where you're listening from. We love that at Teachers Talk Radio as we're expanding and going global. So I just wanted to recap on my show last week. So if you were listening, I interviewed Paul Kirshner, author, academic, researcher, professor. If you missed that episode, you can go back and you can listen to it as a podcast, as you can with all of the Teachers Talk radio shows. And we've had lots of new hosts joining us. We're getting bigger and better. So the chat with Paul Kirshner was incredible. It was so funny, insightful, memorable. Please do check that out if you missed it. I mean, most of the feedback I've had has been about my giggling and how I was laughing at some of his responses. And then I was trying to be professional, but perhaps I didn't come across that way. It was a bit obvious I was hiding my laughter. So I can see Alex Quigley has joined us in the studio, and this is really exciting. I've got some questions that I've prepared, and I've got questions that others have sent in. So, Alex, hello.
Hello, Kate.
Hello, Alex.
Can you hear me, Kate?
Yes, we can. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, that was actually the first time I've had a guest where we've connected so smoothly because we always have one or two tech issues. Yeah, so there we go. Thank you. So how's things? How have you been?
Yeah, good. Early start this morning, so a strong coffee. But yeah, I'm just about to have a little half-term holiday. So yeah,
nice.
Feel really good.
Yeah, but we need that. Well, with all of my guests, I start off with a fun fact. And I've followed you on social media for years, read your books, but I wanted to do a bit of digging, see if I could find something. So this is my fun fact about you to introduce you. And you can confirm or deny this. But you've written a lot of books, and I've been told that you write all of your books, you write them out using pen and paper, and then you type them up. Is that correct?
Kind of. I have a really deliberate, slow process. So I do buy a book. I buy one of those Moleskine books. I write chapter notes really fulsomely. So I go quite close to writing it out longhand, but I don't quite fully. But then I type all those notes up. Then I color code it, I organize it, I type it up again. I've got this really weird kind of detailed process where I pretty much write the book 2 or 3 times. So not quite. I'd like to say I hand wrote it all. That's got like a bit of an old-fashioned kind of process, but not quite. But I have got. I'm going to treat it as a bit of a keepsake. For each book, I've got this Moleskine kind of notebook, which is kind of the book in this scruffy form. So yeah, kind of Kind of.
Yeah. Well, I got that information from your old boss, John Thompson. So I asked him for a fun fact that was suitable for live radio.
Yeah.
And that's what John said.
Yeah, so not a completely accurate source there. So John needs to check up on his facts.
Okay, but that is really interesting because previous guests we've had, we've actually spoken to them about their writing process. Tom and Oliver, obviously they've worked together, and Paul Kirshner spoke about with Carl Hendrick, and Mary Myatt. And actually, I think you're the first person who probably physically writes as much. I do write when I write down. There's something I like about getting ideas down onto paper. And when John said that, I could imagine you doing that just based on your, your love of writing. I sort of can't imagine you, but I just thought, oh wow, what a time-consuming thing to do. But,
I don't know if people I think every writer has their own unique process. I think for me, I spend about a year researching. So because I'm reading a lot of those books, I have to write down. So I'll read a book, I'll make little notes in the margin about the quotes I like and want to remember, and I have to write all of those down. And then I leave it a few weeks, forget them. So this is my own little retrieval practice. And then I type them up a few weeks later. And that just makes me read and reread and think and remember. And that bit's really slow. But then when I get to the actual writing of the book, I can do it really, really quickly. Because I've got so many, my notes are so detailed, and I've actually gone through them really, really thoroughly. So it sounds like a really slow process, and it is at the start, but then the last mile is really quick. And I've had to do that a little bit because in fact, every book I've ever written, I've had a full-time job at the same time. So I don't have that privilege of kind of sitting there. You have this, you imagine a writer like Stephen King just sits in their big chair and just kind of writes all week. I've never really had that. So in my holidays and in the summer, I've often had, a day or three of proper try and get the book written time. But mainly I'll write the book in an hour a night, or, the corners of weekends, as Jeff Barton used to describe it. So because that's so intermittent and kind of coffee fueled, you need a lot to go on. You can't sit in front of a blank screen at 11 o'clock at night. So for me, having all those detailed notes means that I can just work in a little bit of writing on the train, a little bit at night, a little bit on the weekend. So probably, you form these habits to fit around your life, don't you? And whether they're the most efficient habits, I'm not quite sure, but it definitely works for me. And it means that whenever I sit down to write, it feels like quite an easy thing because I've done so much work.
Well, you are a brilliant writer, and I've met Ian Rankin, the Scottish author, and he has a separate house in Scotland with no Wi-Fi, where he can say to his family, "I'm going off for a few weeks or a few months, write a book, and come back." And actually, I'm leaving my current role, and I'll be taking. I'm now staying until December, as my replacement can't start till January. But I plan to take a month off to write in Paris. That's the dream. Wow. Wow. Whether that will happen or not, I'm not sure. Hopefully, I don't imagine. I know, because like you, I think there is something great about somebody who is working and living and breathing and writing about teaching. But it's tough. It's so tough. Teaching's tough anyway, and then writing on top of that. But is there some sort of secret CPD going on at Huntington School? Because there's John Thompson, Johnny Utley worked there. There's the new book where lots of the Huntington staff. So it's quite a special school, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lovely school. My daughter goes to Huntington as well, and my son will soon. So there's no better sign of a school than you send your own kids there. I think. Well, I was there, nearly 16 years. So it did predate John Thompson. He was actually deputy head. He left to be a head the year I joined the school. So I didn't see him for 5 or 6 years. But I think when John took over, he's really focused on just getting better. He's really passionate about the job and about pupils and about supporting teachers. And I think just that climate was just really positive.
And then I think some of these things are chance, aren't they? But I think John was really outward looking. I think we both got interested in social media and kind of the educational debates that were going off on Twitter, and I think that positivity and that kind of passion of John kind of rubbed off on me and other people, and it's just really good climate to learn in. And then the likes of myself, Johnny, lots of other teachers just given opportunities. And I think in truth, you'll know this when you work with lots of teachers, often there's brilliance in every school. It's often a case of opportunity and teachers given time, given a platform to speak at an event, or to write a blog or an article for TES and similar. And I think so that there's an element of that kind of being in the right place and being with other people who are taking opportunities and seeing them and being outward looking. And I think it's just became a really thriving kind of place, is a thriving place. And I think John's stepping down from head this year, and Matt takes over. And again, there's lots of excellence in the school. I think in truth as well, just really good at, you have to these days kind of promote your school and, what you can do and the skills of your teachers, because, that's important to the success of the school. And I think, becoming a research school and developing these extra strings to your bow, they help. And so, I think it's an outward looking school, it's a forward looking school, and got some great teachers in there who've had the chance of getting a platform. And I feel very lucky to have worked there.
Yeah, well, wasn't your role, because obviously your background, you're a teacher of English, but you were director of research as well. Is that what? Yeah, well, that's interesting, because that's a role that not all schools certainly have, but it's emerging more as a role. And I was delivering a webinar about evidence-informed teaching and how you do that, and actually, it's really tough, the time it takes, but having a research lead, I think that can help massively. So kind of, I know this sounds a bit silly, but what did you do as director of research? What did that role entail?
Yeah, so I think moved up in a kind of traditional way. From I was head of English, became assistant head, and in leading CPD, there was like a dual role that we thought it was really important that CPD was strongly informed by evidence. There were good resources out there that were informing teacher training, and so I think it was in many ways started as a typical school leadership role, where we thought research evidence was a good way to kind of check that what we were doing had a sound basis, was a good bet, and offered us some kind of critical processes. So one of the things, we developed disciplined inquiry, where instead of your kind of typical annual PD targets, we had more of a exploratory focus, where you focused on an aspect of practice and you tried to make a change, and you were supported to reflect and analyze on that change, whether it caused any improvement. You were supported to look at evidence in that area for that change. So it might be an MFL teacher looking to more effectively teach verbs. It can be a teacher using quizzing and retrieval practice. There were lots of different variations. I think what was really important that moved the role from just a typical assistant head and then deputy head was that we became an EEF research school. So being as part of the research school network meant that bluntly, you have funding to be able to do the work, and it becomes more of an outward looking role then, where you're supporting other schools to engage with evidence, to engage with guidance reports and kind of new evidence that emerges, etc. And because you're funded and supported, and you've got a network we had the IE from York University helping us, and the EF to be able to deliver training outwardly and to be able to communicate outwardly, it allowed us to build a team within the school, which allowed us to do and to lead the training internally. So, it's those benefits again of being outward looking, where you're able to get additional resource. And that meant that we had a team of people including myself as director of research school and brilliant colleagues like Jane Ellsworth and Steve Foreman, where we actually were then able to support every individual teacher and undertake their disciplined inquiry. And we were able to have directory of our own kind of resources. And so I think it was a bit of a unique scenario where it did start as a research lead being a critical voice on the SLT and trying to make sure that the school improvement plans were robust and challenged and informed by evidence. But then it did morph into something that was a bit more external, working with other schools, which just gives you that capacity to work internally. And I think it's one of those crucial things where you have to invest in people, you have to invest in time for colleagues within your school and externally to engage with high quality CPD, ideally informed by really good evidence. Because if you don't invest that time, all you get is some frankly extraordinary people just doing brilliant things in their own time. And I bump into lots of people like that, and a lot of people talk to me often about how do you get into writing books or doing doing this external training. And frankly, it's probably just a few years of doing extra stuff outside of school. It wasn't doing my core business in school, and that's not equitable. And you say about the benefits of Huntington. I know the reality of Huntington. One of the factors why I was able to write books is, we had a sensible feedback policy. And little realities like that. Teachers have to have time, but then they need that skills support because, realistically, I think if you're trying to do every individual teacher trying to do really good practice, so, some inquiry about their own work needs to be informed by some subject-specific evidence. That takes a lot of support, and so you've really got to invest in it as a school. And sometimes that investment only comes when you're a bit entrepreneurial and you look outside and you kind of do these additional things as well.
Well, that seems like it was a natural fit for your next role and your current role, which is with the EEF. Basically, is it moving on what you were doing at Huntington, but on a much bigger scale? And I knew that you worked with the EEF, and I'm very familiar with the literacy guidance report that you co-authored for secondary schools, amongst other things. So is that really what you do in your role now? Things like the guidance report?
So I think I described the research school network. At first it was 5 schools, schools all the way from Kingsbridge and Devon to Huntington in York. And we had we grew that network. It's now, when you include associate research schools, around 40 schools. And in part of that growth, I ended up doing, I was still at Huntington, still teaching, still leading the research school at Huntington, but I ended up doing some days a year supporting the other research schools as a developer, just based on the experience of being one. New research schools, Durrington Research School, kind of schools that people are familiar with. And as part of that, worked a bit with the EEF. I ended up helping out with co-writing the metacognition guidance report. So that gave me that kind of additional experience of working with the EEF. And basically I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And I was just ready for a new challenge. I was really, really enjoying working at Huntington. I was really pleased that I left never feeling frustrated or kind of bored or, kind of feeling limited in any way. I kind of left at a point where I felt I was still really enjoying it and kind of thriving, really. But I had the opportunity to join the EEF first as a bit of a senior associate, so a bit of a mixed role, working on developing resources, working on kind of a variety of things. But I became, less than a couple of years ago, the national content manager. So in that role, it is about the tools and resources that go around guidance report. So, take the, secondary literacy guidance report. Well, yes, hopefully that it's a really good distillation of the best available evidence for disciplinary literacy, how you read and write and teach vocabulary and talk in secondary schools. But also you need accessible tools that wrap around that. You've got to have, a guidance report, 30 or so pages, lots of people with some training can access that, but they also need other resources to be able to put that into practice. So sometimes you need to distill it all right down to a slide of A4 so it fits in a teacher planner. So one of the roles of National Content Manager is developing the kind of resources across all of the areas of evidence. So the subject areas, literacy, math, science, metacognition, behavior, social emotional learning. We effectively have a curriculum of evidence, and we've got a broad range of guidance reports. So they need that wraparound. They need those actionable tools for teachers. And then also you need to have messages. You need to write articles for teachers, blogs, kind of develop the training programs. So the research school, we have a range of training programs, some of that supported more centrally. We always have experts from around the country, teachers working on those. So yeah, the role's quite exciting one about just developing those resources, those messages, those campaigns, those guidance reports, so they're actionable for teachers. My experience, just through practice as much as anything, through that research lead role, through my kind of writing and reading and talking about evidence whilst teaching, whilst being a teacher, was I kind of developed a good understanding of how you mediate, these complex research papers into practical, useful messages for teachers. And effectively, I've been really lucky because I've been able to make that my job. So, I think we've got a new guidance report on feedback, teacher feedback for pupils' learning coming out in a couple of weeks. And I've had the real privilege to be able to co-write that with Joe Collin. And again, that feedback guidance report, the best distillation of the available evidence at this time, but then it also needs that support and that wraparound and those tools and resources. So I've got a brilliant content team, content specialists, and we work on those. Interestingly, they're all, again, based in schools. So people like Nikki Kaiser, you might know, who's a science teacher who's got a really big following on Twitter. Simon Cox, mathematician based in Blackpool. He's kind of led out Research at Blackpool, which gets like 500-600 people over to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, not quite the beach actually, but and then Kirsten Mould, who's again working Senko, brilliant teacher over at Mary Webb School, and then Caroline Bilton, our literacy lead, who's based again in a primary school in Northumberland. So I get to work with basically my colleagues who are hybrids of working teachers, and they're able to develop on these resources. And it feels like for me that's where research evidence, what it needs to do to be mediated for busy teachers. It needs teachers who have got time and support and the role to understand that research, but it always needs translation. Even really well written research, where they've kind of thought carefully about how they communicate it in an accessible way, it still needs to be converted into resources, tools, messages. It needs to be phase specific often, subject specific often. So, if you think about the feedback guidance, well, that'll be, I think, useful for every teacher to access, but you still need to think about that as a secondary school English teacher, because how you give feedback in written verbal form is different to a primary school teacher who's teaching a range of subjects and thinking about a variety of different things to a secondary school English teacher. So yeah, developed a role that is about mediating evidence for busy teachers, having lived that role and really enjoy doing it.
Yeah, well, I can absolutely vouch about how accessible it is. So for anyone who hasn't seen this work, I've just tweeted it out. It is from the Education Endowment Foundation.org. And for that guidance report that I mentioned about literacy, improving literacy in secondary schools, you have the full report. And then you've got that, as you said, the one-page poster with the 7 recommendations bullet pointed. And from my experience recently, something that I'm working on, and Tom Sherrington's helping me with it, and it's quite brief, and I really struggled to condense so much information. It's not easy. So the fact that you have these summaries, they're absolutely brilliant. And we do have a question from Freya. Freya is an English teacher in Rome. I love the work of the EEF. Are there any plans to support international development and have an international research school? EEF in Abu Dhabi in Rome, and let's any plans to that?
So the EEF there's the national network in England. I think the EEF has been engaged in international work for a number of years now. So there's partnerships with Jordan, there's partnerships with Australia, and I think
wow.
kind of the Netherlands and connections across the world. I think what we've always, I don't kind of speak for the EF kind of singularly, but what the EF have always tried to do is have those partnerships that are obviously rooted in the culture of the country and the needs there. And I think so one of the things, we've got a really positive relationship with an equivalent charity in Spain called Educaixa, and they work with lots of schools. I think they have a larger leadership program, which is a little bit like Research Leads, we talked about earlier. And I know we've supported them, offered some training, but what we've not tried to do is kind of impose a model that's been developed in England across the world. Kind of the Research School Network is something that's been continually evaluated and monitored about kind of how it communicates and its impact on local schools and development of partnerships. So I think we've always kind of worked on, well, let's get this right in England, and let's kind of learn as much as we can about how this works and how you do this best, and then share that across the world. And we have shared that, from Australia to America to Spain to Jordan. And I think every country seems to kind of mediate and meet research evidence slightly differently. So in other countries, it might be a little bit less school-led. So, the idea of a research school network might not be, have the kind of structure. I think in England, there's a bit more of a school-led system for various reasons across the last decade. I think in other countries, you still have government structures where kind of, training and other kind of aspects of engaging with evidence are more centrally kind of supported and structured. So, yeah, I think there will be different networks in different countries emerge that are like the Research School Network, but there's not yet that current plan to take what's in England and kind of and stretch it across the world. But it's interesting, isn't it? So I think if you look at how different countries engage with research evidence, I've been to kind of lots of research school events in Scandinavia and Dublin and lots of different countries, and I've travelled for the EF to Copenhagen and these different places. I think every country seems to be on a slightly different trajectory, a different kind of time sequence, and I can see different networks emerging in different countries in the next 5 to 10 years. I think England have been a bit of an early adopter with engaging with research evidence. Just if you count EEF trials and similar, the number of research trials undertaken in English schools in the last 10 years is phenomenal. It kind of, it's huge relative to the size of country we are. There's only the likes of the US where it has an equivalent, just the sheer size of the US. So I think England's really well developed in terms of engaging with researchable evidence. You see that, you see that in social media, you see that on Twitter, just how it seems baked into the culture. Like the likes of your book, retrieval practice and these aspects of cognitive science, they've been around now for a few years, and people kind of recognize, these are part of how we view teaching. And I think every country is on a different trajectory with that, and has different attitudes to research evidence. So I can't promise Freya a kind of a quick fix on that. But I think in the likes of Italy, I think it's about what those local schools want and how it emerges. And I think the EEF is always interested in those different partnerships and learning from what other countries are doing. So there's amazing practice, in those countries that I've mentioned, really interesting practice. So one of the things about being, when I was at Huntington, was we'd often have visits from like delegations of schools from Sweden or Spain or the Gates Foundation from the US. And it was always a real interesting exchange of how they were accessing evidence in different ways or similar ways. So in the US, there is big networks of head teachers who are networked together, and that is informed by evidence and in different ways than it happens over here. I think over here it seems to be more teacher-led, and there's the kind of the grassroots of the likes of Research Ed matched with organisations like EEF and similar. So yeah, I think I've found it really interesting how each country seems to access, support, kind of structure itself and schools around evidence. I don't know enough about Italy to know whether that will emerge, or even just the international school system. I know the international schools from a quite literal distance, and it has its own networks, doesn't it? It has its own kind of like interests, and for me it'll probably be about, does that interest and network, does it see evidence-based practice kind of at the heart of the work? And if it does, then structures like research schools, I think, emerge out of that.
Well, the EEF toolkit and website already is international. The fact that Freya in Italy and I'm in Abu Dhabi, and we look to it. I teach in a British curriculum, which I always laugh because there isn't actually a British curriculum, is there? Because I taught in Wales and it was very different to England. Yeah. But that's what the schools, a lot of schools refer to themselves as internationally British curriculum. But right. Something I have realised is how much we do look to the UK in terms of this. I do think the UK are really leading the way. And regularly resources and blogs and articles from the EEF are shared within my school context. And obviously it is different, but there's lots of it that is applicable. So it's brilliant. It is. If I have tweeted out the links, it is incredible. I would urge anyone who's not familiar with it to explore it, because it's all there. The problems and barriers that we have with research, I feel that you've taken away from that, because it's not behind a paywall. It's not wrapped up in academic jargon. Like you said, it's translated for teachers to be able to grasp. And you've got the option, the report or the summary, and you've catered for at different ages and subjects. So yeah, it is fantastic. It's definitely something that I would encourage people to check out. So what I want to move on to, you have your own website, theconfidentteacher.com. So you kept that name from, and I've talked to you a lot about this book, Alex, and actually I do think it's my favourite book from education. There's lots of books. Yeah, it really is. I've said this for years, because it was a few years ago you put, so the book I'm referring to is The Confident Teacher, Developing Successful Habits of Mind, Body and Pedagogy. So as I said, it's a few years now, but I can't remember when it was published, because I remember reading it.
2016.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So I remember, reading it a few years ago, and it really did transform my career. And at that point, Alex, I hadn't blogged or written anything. And you had, and you were somebody on Twitter that I followed with a large following, a successful author, and I greatly admired you. But in the book, you were really honest about these lessons that went badly wrong for you and some of these experiences. And it was just hard for me. I know that sounds silly, but I wouldn't have imagined that you had been through that. And now I'm an author. Some teachers have sort of said the same thing to me, that, well, you must be brilliant. And they have this perception of me. And I say, no, we all go through that. Now I have these lessons as well. But I think teacher confidence is so important. Your book was so honest. It was really refreshing. It covers so much as well, from subject knowledge to behavior. And there isn't a book out there that really deals with this issue of teacher confidence. So, and actually your other books, obviously we'll talk about them, the Closing the Gap collection, and your previous book, I've had more of an English and a literacy focus. So
Yeah.
what made you want to write The Confident Teacher?
Yeah, so in truth, when I wrote it, I'd been a teacher for about 13 years or so, and yeah, I was just starting to kind of find this kind of platform. I blogged for about 3 or 4 years, and effectively, by blogging, you're not really showing you're an amazing teacher. You're showing you can communicate in words about aspects of your teaching. Maybe there's some match between your ability to communicate in the written words and communicate in the classroom, but maybe that's not that consistent. So, but I was given this platform of kind of writing about teaching. But what I was really clear about is, yes, I was choosing to read lots of extra stuff and write about it and write about my thoughts and kind of policy views and all these other things. But I think what was a bit of a dirty secret really was that teaching's really hard. It was really hard for me. For the first few years, I really struggled. For the first year, I felt I emerged out of university and went straight into teaching. There wasn't like that kind of dream like traveling the world. I needed the job and I needed to get paid, and I was very happy to start as a teacher. But I went from being at university, being very successful writing essays, to then having to undertake this most complex of jobs where you're kind of juggling the needs of 30 different children at any one time, trying to communicate really complex knowledge. And I didn't find it natural. I didn't find it easy. And right down to kind of how I used to speak. So I had a really strong Scouse accent, but a really deep and low voice. So I moved to York because it was the first job I'd have, mate. I failed 3 interviews before I got this one. And I got the job at Huntington. And I had to really quite quickly be a bit more extrovert. I had to change my voice so I was a bit more well understood. I had to really quickly learn about different behavior management strategies. I was teaching 18-year-olds when I was just turned 22. So in my first year of teaching, I was living alone. I was exhausted. I found it really hard. I loved elements of it, but broadly, it was just hard. It was hard work. And then in year 2, it got easier, but it wasn't easy. And in year 3, you have new classes, different challenges you've not faced before. And I just recognized, not just for new teachers, but the job is tiring, it's stressful, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's really hard at the same time. And I think, we celebrate the profession, and we should celebrate the profession. And hopefully, though not teaching now, I still do support and celebrate the profession. But, let's not sugarcoat that it's not hard work either, whether that's, giving, planning lessons and the written marking and those other things outside of the lessons, and then the lessons themselves and all of the, challenges that come with that, and working with parents and supporting high need pupils. So with that degree of difficulty, it's stressful, it's tiring, and I didn't feel like there was a book that felt like it captured, one, the physical aspect of the job, the mental aspect, the physical and mental stress that attended it. And that relates to behavior. That relates to how well you teach. It's not just about, having a spa day. It's not about, having a well-being session. Actually, so much of becoming better as a teacher and it being less stressful is how you manage feedback, how you teach with memory in mind, how you model really well, but also how you take care of yourself and how you use your time and how, you manage yourself physically and all those factors. And I felt like I was an unconfident teacher for at least 5 or 6 years of my career. And no one really was talking about that. No one was really kind of sharing, okay, let's look at all these really hard bits. And perhaps there was, a lot of people talking about workload, a lot of people talking about these individual things. I felt like people weren't joining up well-being and the stresses and challenges with how well you teach and how well you manage the classroom, etc. So that's where the kind of that triumvirate model of that mind, of the psychological aspects of teaching, the physical aspects, and then the teaching aspects. And if I reflect back now, I'm really proud of the book. When you mentioned it the other day, I kind of gave it a skim, and in many ways it represents the best of what I thought over 5 years of writing, and it distills a lot of what I thought about teaching, and hopefully that kind of shines through in terms of positivity. But also I think what shines through is I experienced a lot of failures. I found behavior management hard, until which point I was pretty expert at it and stopped finding it hard. But everyone goes on that journey from novice teacher to expert. So it captures a lot of that. I mean, one of the interesting things, like back in 2016, so I wrote it in 2015 in reality. It's got Rosenshine in there. It's got memory and retrieval practice in there. It's got kind of, it's got a lot of things that are more embedded now, better known now. Metacognition is in there, and I look back and I am really proud of it. I think it's really useful. I always thought it was really useful for new teachers as much as anyone, but I actually know that I wanted to write a book for my teaching self about 7 years in, when I was at that point where I was thinking about leaving teaching, or whether I was going to go into leadership. And I wanted to write it for an experienced teacher who just wants to sharpen up what they do and get better at what they do. I think one of the ironies, and I write about this in the book about being confident and overconfident, is often, if you look at a book about becoming a confident teacher, often we feel confident enough that we know all those basics. So we often, we just don't think we're unconfident, because to be a teacher, you've just got to get through the day. So you need a degree of overconfidence. So I think the book got focused on new teachers, which is great and which I'm really happy about. But I think I know I've spoken to a lot of more experienced teachers who felt it mirrored some of the challenges they still had and have. And so, yeah, I was really pleased with how well it did. And yeah, I'm really glad that it's your favorite book. And I think for me, I think we've all got those kind of books that at the right time seem to speak to our experience. And that's not for everyone, is it? But I think for me, I wrote it at that point, trying to capture, all those like nuanced things that help you become a confident expert teacher. I didn't feel like people had put those together in a way that met me. So I'm really proud of it. It feels it's a very personal book to me. And yeah, really pleased. I look back at it now, I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty good.
It's amazing. But I read it, actually, you said I read it 6 years into my career, so I wasn't an NQT, and I obviously still felt like that, and I revisited it and felt this is certainly not a book that is out of date. I've just recently bought a copy and sent it to someone that I know as a gift, because I know they'll take so much away from it. But the really interesting thing about confidence, the school I'm currently at, so I joined in September 2019, and I would say at that point I was very confident. I was sharing, I was very happy for the teachers to there was no issue. And then a few months later, we are obviously hit with a global pandemic, and in my context, we had online learning for Key Stage 3. We're having online lessons for a whole year, and we were having Google Classroom, Zoom lessons, and I just felt my confidence just drop, because this was completely new. I had never done this, never been trained in it. I didn't enjoy it. As someone who always banging on, I love to teach, and it just wasn't the same. We're still not out of it. We're the situation at the moment in the United Arab Emirates is very hybrid. So I'll have some students in class and some on Zoom. And then also I now wear a hearing aid, and I've had hearing problems probably since, I've really noticed it since September 2020. And it's been heightened by the fact that students have to be socially distant. and there's the face masks, and hearing loss. I've tweeted about it, and lots of teachers have responded to me, and we've had a really good conversation about the impact that has on our confidence in the classroom. And I've spoke to my students about this, that there was a phase where I was avoiding asking too many questions because I couldn't hear. I really was struggling to hear. And now I have got my hearing aid, and when I wore it when I was teaching year 9, and I could hear them at the back, and it was quite emotional actually. And in terms of my confidence, that's what I said, your book covers so much, from behaviour elements to CPD to subject knowledge to all of these things. But it is definitely something that we should talk about, and there's so many factors that can have an impact on our confidence, and more so now. And I've just mentioned about COVID. So if you were to write a second version of The Confident Teacher 2, is there anything you think that you would add? Because that's how I ended up writing Retrieval Practice 2, because there was so much I thought, oh, I've now read this, I wish I could add this. So do you feel that way?
Yeah, so just to go back on that point where you talked about, like, you know, the personal health and those factors. I think we often just feel really nervous talking about that. So it's really good to hear you being so open about that. I think a truth, we do talk about well-being, but often, you know, it's only a small number of people who are kind of open that their well-being has been affected by teaching, by a change of leader, or by moving schools, or going on maternity leave. You know, and one of the things, you know, when you live life as a teacher, you end up having lots of teacher friends. And I've got, you know, 2 of my siblings, you know, work in schools, you know, teach. My kind of virtually all my friends are either teachers or ex-teachers. And you, through that personal experience, you recognise that, you know, being absent from school, or a change in habits, or a change in, you know, your best friend leaving your school, you know, that can really, you know, change your confidence. It can change how you feel about the job. Changing classes every year. I mean, if anything, teaching's one of those jobs that it's its biggest strength. It's ceaselessly interesting and never the same. But then also that change can you know, really, you know, impact you. And because I became so, you know, you couldn't go out anywhere, couldn't go on holidays, etc., for a number of years, kind of saving up to be a dad and to have a house and all those other things that we were trying to do. So, you know, your life goes on these different turns, like moving to international school, and actually we don't often, you know, take into account how those changes impact our practice in the classroom, because so much of teaching is a physical, emotional, you know, kind of act, isn't it? You know, that kind of classic, kind of almost cheesy analogy. It's like being on stage, you know, 5 hours a day type of thing. But there's such a truth to that. It's exhausting in a brilliant way. Yeah. A physical job and just small. I think about COVID and, you know, those people who just, when you get a virus, you know, how many times where you're teaching and your health is just at 80%. And teaching always demands that kind of 95, 100% of your energy, doesn't it? And I think so many of those aspects we just take for granted, and we accept, and teachers' workload's always really high, and we don't really, you know, grasp that nettle. Is an answer like Confident Teacher 2? I'm not sure. I think some of the golden kind of answers are down to teachers having time baked into their week. You know, we have Liverpool, you know, teachers are really kind of have a privileged status in society, but they also have lots of training time. And I think we do need to be supported by those structural aspects. One of the things at Huntington, why people, you know, kind of feel like they can do things and write chapters in books, like you talked about, is because they've got a good structure that offers them time and support and good training. So I'm not explaining away, you know, the book, but I think those other factors are really key, and it won't be enough just to give people tips. they have to have the structures and the support and the recognition from leadership about these emotional challenges. You know, one of the things at Huntington, I always felt, I became a parent, and you know, when my daughter had her first day at school, or when there was, you know, these special events, I knew completely that John and the leadership team in you know, doing those things. Or I know that that's not the case everywhere, and I know that culture, you know, is not everywhere, and sometimes teachers are burnt out and churned out. So yeah, I think some of the structural aspects of teaching and how we support teachers need to change. If I actually answer your question and actually get around to your question, I reckon one of the strengths of wide ranging, you know, psychology, physicality, behavior, memory, motivation. I think and it's what I wanted to do. I think almost though, it's a bit like a takeout where you've got so many different things and you're just a bit overfull. I think if I was to write a second version, I think it's the section at the end, the teaching section, you know, mentioning shine and modeling and metacognition. Like I was cramming that into a little small section, and I was never doing any of it at justice. And you know, you've written an entire books, you've written plural books on just retrieval practice, that one aspect of memory. And so I feel like big chunks of that book are introductions to those areas. And I know in future, I think when I finish my Closing the Gap kind of series, I want to go back to memory and modeling and metacognition. I want to really dig into the evidence there again. It's a privilege I get as part of my job to do that, but you know, thinking about those things again, you know, Rosenshine, you know, writing about it 5 years ago, you know, there's been a lot of advances in practice. There's been, you know, Tom Sharrington's massively successful, you know, book around it. So I kind of want to revisit that last section and do that justice, I think. And I think a lot has moved on since, in an exciting way. So probably that's where my expertise has gone. I think the aspects about the psychology and the physicality and behavior management, all of those are really crucial. But I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because I'm not teaching. In truth, I feel like, you know, you can't talk about teacher stress as much if you're not a stress teacher. And maybe that's, you know, maybe I'm being unfair on myself, but I just think that's just how I feel about it. So
well, that's the thing.
Aspects of teaching. Go on.
Well, it's just the tough thing, isn't it? It's great to hear from teachers in the classroom, but it's so tough to be writing when you're in the classroom. Like I said, when I write my book, I could be sat in the coffee shop in Paris, and that's a totally different reality from a 6-lesson day of teaching. So it's this double-edged sword of great, we've got teacher authors, but also the pressures and the challenges of being a teacher author as well. But I actually want you to write, Alex, and I've thought this a few times, and you've had different leadership roles. I'd like you to write The Confident Leader, because I feel like that's a book and there's lots of great leadership books out there, but dealing with, because I think that's different again, because like I said, when I joined the school, I was very, very confident, but it wasn't my first leadership role, but they had all new systems and things I was trying to get used to. And there's been a big difference between my confidence as a teacher in the classroom and then my confidence as a leader. So yeah, I'm pretty much making a request for the confident leader. I just think that would be brilliant.
Yeah, I think leadership, again, it's one of those things. It's really hard. You get promoted into positions of leadership that you're not quite trained for, so you're learning on the job again, and then you're still doing the old job. I think being a head of English, and I kind of went and had multiple leadership positions after that, but I think being the head of English was the hardest job I ever had, and have ever had since. And I think that's because you're still doing so much of the timetable, you're teaching the timetable, but then also led a department of 15 or 16 brilliant colleagues, but you do have to deal with the emotional terrain of supporting everyone. and supporting yourself at the same time. And I think, yeah, moving into leadership, often in schools, it's kind of just do more and do it better. And I think certainly when I moved through leadership, well over a decade now, I was really unconvinced by the research evidence about it, in truth. So, the kind of the MPQs and the training back then was around like leadership styles, and kind of lots of cycles and lots of models. But I was pretty unconvinced by it, and I did get interested in it. And I kind of did dig around. I have these like research obsessions every once in a while, and leadership was one of them. And I wasn't really that impressed. If I can have the arrogance to say that, I think, I think there's definitely work to be done in terms of distilling that down. I think one of my learnings over the last 2 or 3 years is about implementation. There's a whole implementation science developed, far outside of schools and in medicine and all these different areas. That's really interesting. And just the practicalities of implementation being really hard, making a change being really hard. And I've felt there's been really useful insights there. So one of the EF Guidance reports, Putting Evidence to Work, is about implementation. And for me, it was a bit of a revelation that it kind of gave me some of those structures and it mirrored some of the realities of being a school leader. Didn't capture everything, but it was really useful. And then a couple of researchers that I've read more of the last couple of years that feel like they capture both the complexity of teaching and school leadership better than most everything else I've ever read is Vivian Robinson. So her latest book about I can't remember its title now. It's got like a little flame on the front, and it's about reducing change to increase improvement. I think that's the title. If I've slightly got it wrong, apologies. Okay. But again, it's a real pragmatic that actually improving a school isn't about overhauling things really quickly and changing everything, because teachers simply can't change all those habits. You described about what everyone had to go through moving to online, and it's near intolerable to change that many habits that quickly that you've taken years to craft. And I think that recognition that changing a single teacher habit is really hard. And like retrieval practice, one aspect of teaching is really tricky. Behavior management, one aspect of that is really tricky. And I just don't think I saw that represented enough in leadership literature. You have these good to great books and similar, and it's all about transforming in 2 years. And you know what? I don't ever see schools that are transformed in a year. Yeah, you can make strides because you've got new leadership and there are issues, etc. Invariably, my experience and from what I've read, that real good school improvement is at least 3 to 5 years to kind of change that culture, to build support structures, to bring people with you, to kind of get new systems in place. Good change is pretty slow, and actually that's where, if I was to ever write about that, and again, I feel I'm not a school leader now, so I kind of again feel like sometimes I just can't speak about certain things because I feel like I'm not living it. But I would talk about kind of approaches to school leadership that aren't about confident transformation, because I don't think school leadership should be about confident transformation. We need enough confidence to do a good job and to make all the decisions that that matter, but not so much confidence that you think you're going to transform things in a year, because invariably you won't bring everyone with you at that pace of change. And the other researcher who I think is brilliant on it is Mary Kennedy, and her work. She's an American researcher, and it's often about teaching, but she's written books about kind of, again, the experience of teachers. Reminds me a little bit of Graham Nuttall and his Hidden Lives of Learners, where she really gets into the classroom and she interviews lots of American teachers and understands their habit change. And I blogged about it. There was a quote from one of the teachers who basically was talking about, that emotional feeling where the class is a little bit out of control and you just not got them where you want them.
and you're getting a bit nervous and it's a bit loud and your heart's thumping. And I thought, God, I wrote about that in Confident Teacher. I've written about that before. That feeling where the class is just a little bit beyond and you've not got them where you want them and they're not behaving. The emotions you go through when that's actually happening, you know, I've written about it. I've been really open about it. The lengths we will go to not have that happen in our classroom will often outweigh all our best, you know, designs about amazing memory, you know, cognitive science informed teaching, you know, kind of all of those, you know, subject knowledge and communicating the best of what's thought and said about Shakespeare. Actually, so much of teaching is about making sure that the 28 children in front of you are basically doing the thing you want them to do, and they're not, you know, they're not going off task and they're not, you know, causing a disturbance. And when you look at teaching on that micro level, you know, you open the kind of black box of the classroom and you think about the reality of teacher habits, emotions, about, you know, just getting through that day and getting the, you know, getting the scheme of work done, you know, on time, being the class that has done the assessment in the right week and you're not 2 weeks late. You know, all of these smaller challenges that teachers are facing. I think, you know, school leadership needs to focus on that slow, careful support of teachers. And sometimes I even think, you know, with research, we've got this kind of grand notion that, you know, oh, you should be, you know, informed by all this amazing research. And I think being evidence informed is pretty important. You know, kind of testified kind of the last 10 years of my work to try and support that. But actually, on a fundamental level, I think we need to get those foundations in place, you know, kind of classrooms where teachers feel confident, they're ordered, they're structured, we've got a good curriculum, we're doing a good job. When it goes wrong, teachers get supported. And I think actually we could do with a bit less confident leadership and a bit more of that kind of careful, kind of probably unconfident leadership. That is really critical, and that is supporting teachers and recognizing that failure is the norm and struggle is the norm, not this kind of shiny brilliance. And you know, you made that point earlier around, you know, some people are kind of surprised if you've ever indicated any struggles with teaching, and you said there was a bit of a mirror where when you read that you were a bit surprised that I was writing about that. I think that's a little bit at the heart of the problem, that, you know, in social media, it's like the whole Instagram effect, that we Instagram that picture in Paris, you know, with our coffee writing, and actually we don't Instagram the picture where we're knackered on Thursday night, we've kind of just finished planning and we've had a really bad day and that class was rubbish. You know, we don't Instagram that. That's not what we share. So we can often get this distorted view of teaching, you know, a shiny school somewhere in London or, you know, or Abu Dhabi is kind of this amazing school and everything's perfect. Well, no, people are struggling. It's a hard job. It's got some good leadership. Yes, it's got some brilliant teachers. So does every school. And I think just that kind of, that honesty, that criticality, that kind of caution, that recognition that most things are really hard in teaching, I think that would make for better school leaders.
Yeah, so it's the Instagram versus reality. Tom Rogers has said, amen, Alex. And I know Tom has read your Confident Teacher book and loved it. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I've tried to be a bit more mindful of that, because I often tweet, yo, my book is #1 on Amazon. But then I applied to speak at Education Festival and they said, you know, sorry, you've not been successful this time. And I thought, I'll share that as well, because I'll try and share the rough with the smooth and trying not to have that Instagram. I mean, that's not the end of the world, but I just wanted to start sharing more examples, because like you mentioned about how you went for jobs and you weren't successful before Huntington, there are some more teachers now sharing that and normalizing it and not afraid to put on Twitter, well, I went for a job and I didn't get it, because years ago I wouldn't have said that, because I would have thought, oh, well, people will think I'm rubbish if I didn't get the job. And now actually it happens. And and look at the success you've had. So I've got so many questions to ask you about the Closing the Gap collection. So we're just very quickly going to hear from, because with Teachers Talk Radio, people can now advertise with us, and we've got a great advertiser. So I'll just play that very quickly. But Alex, please don't go away, because I've got more questions. And keep sending your questions and comments in. I've had some on Twitter, some through Podbean, and it was called, I've just double checked it for you, Vivian Robinson, Reduce Change, Increase Improvement. So all of the references that you make, I will tweet them out as well. So don't worry about that, Alex. Right, yeah. So now let's hear from this is my first time sharing our advertiser. So let's hear from Amanda. Yes.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk.
Oh, okay, thank you. So if you do want to advertise for Teachers Talk Radio, obviously it's an audience of teachers, then get in touch with us on social media or on our website. So back to you, Alex, and moving on now to, I think it's fair to say, the Closing the Gap collection, because you've published Closing the Vocabulary Gap, Closing the Reading Gap, yeah. And is there another Closing the Gap book on the way, or is that?
There's a no, there is. It's the last one. Some people will be glad to know. The last one is on writing, Closing the Writing Gap. So it was always my plan to do. I wanted to start with vocabulary because it was accessible. I felt like it was definitely a thing I was talking about a lot as a teacher at the time, and speaking to. I was working in projects with primary schools and with other secondary school colleagues, and we just kept on talking about that challenge. It was around about the time where there was the Dead Dodo SATs paper and the changes in the curriculum. The curriculum was getting a bit harder in England, and one of those factors was just the sheer language demand of the curriculum that became more clear to people. So, yeah, started with vocabulary. My last book was reading, a bit more of a complex thing, but reading's obviously the gateway to the school curriculum. It's just vital for school success. And then I'm currently writing Closing the Writing Gap. And again, that kind of rounds things off. People have talked about kind of talk and the importance of oracy. I think that really is crucial. I've tried to kind of weave that through the topics that I've chosen so far. So yeah, the Closing. I've been really bowled over, particularly the vocabulary gap. I kind of wrote that having never written any sort of book or pamphlet about literacy before. Even though I was an English teacher, I was a little bit nervous about kind of treading in that area really. But I was emboldened by kind of standing on the shoulders of brilliant researchers, people like Jeff Barton, who he was the editor of my very first book and was just a brilliant mentor. Amazingly, whilst being a really busy head teacher at the time, was just so helpful. So yeah, they've been really successful, and in many ways, I think it's because it's the job of every teacher. And what I've described, one aspect of the gap is that I was an English teacher for 10 years. I'd never really ever had training about how children learn to read or how children read to learn when they're adolescents, and all the differences and nuances there. So again, I kind of felt like I was writing a book for my own teacher self, who felt like there was like these big areas that I didn't feel confident in. And it's turned out, I think, that there's a much larger audience for that, for how to teach vocabulary. It seems like such an obvious thing that everyone does, but it's not so obvious, it's not so common, it's hard to do systematically, it's hard to do well. So yeah, I was always suspect of literacy training, you know, kind of literacy across the curriculum. And it was always a little bit kind of didn't quite capture the nuances of being an English teacher, or it didn't quite serve the maths department. So I've had a real clear eye for, okay, what does literacy mean for, you know, younger children? How is that different when they get to secondary school? How is it different in business studies, in mathematics, in science? And I've been on, you know, a real interesting kind of research journey in the last 3 or 4 years about understanding all of those differences, and basically again just trying to do that job of simplifying it, summarizing it. So I kind of stand on the shoulder of countless brilliant researchers. Literacy is one of those areas that's really strongly, you know, researched. So I've just been doing that job of that teacher, trying to make sense of this for other teachers.
And I think what you've done, and I read Jeff Barton's book, Don't Call It Literacy, isn't it? Because what you've both really made clear, and David Dido was written about this as well, is that, you know, I remember reading somewhere about literacy getting lumped with the English department. And I know that's quite a blunt phrase, but the point was thinking it was the sole responsibility. And actually, as a teacher of history, where it's absolutely essential, well, any subject. And there was a tweet I received from a teacher called David, who's a history teacher, and he put, I teach history, reading is an essential element of my subject, but CPD with reading has always been restricted to the English department. How can we support teachers with how to teach reading across all subjects in secondary? So would you say that's the responsibility of middle leaders, perhaps, head of departments, or does it come from the top? But you're absolutely right in terms of teaching reading and again, confidence with reading and strategies with reading outside of perhaps English and secondary as well, because I see lots of teachers, primary school teachers, who obviously do a lot with reading, and I don't see as much discussion, and myself included. I haven't ever written about this either. So what should we do to really support teachers with teaching reading? Or should we say read your book? Is that the best answer?
Well, yeah, that goes without saying, doesn't it? Yeah, buy the book. Yeah. Everything will be fixed. No, I think so. You mentioned about, is it the job of middle leaders or senior leaders or teachers themselves? And I think, you know, like most things, it's a little bit of everyone's job. So I think the reality of reading, it's one of the most complex things that a student, a young child can do. And it's amazing. And it's one of the things that marks out our, you know, civilization, that we can do this amazing, dizzying act of translating, you know, these signs from the page into this complex language. But the problem is we often take it for granted. And secondary school teachers who are already grappling with the complexities of, you know, teaching human history or teaching science and teaching the rules of physics, etc. You actually often make an assumption that most children in your class can read really well. And that assumption is founded on you know, some basis. So yeah, lots of students in secondary school can read well enough to access the curriculum, and at the margins of a few little strategic, you know, approaches can help them be more efficient as readers, be more effective. And actually, you don't need to do a significant job of teaching reading. Now, that may be true, but we're then teaching for that kind of top third of pupils that we teach that do all this seemingly naturally. And it's not so natural. It's just that for years and years, those students have been reading, kind of synthesizing and kind of building their word hoard. They've been practicing reading different genres to the point where, like driving a car, it feels like a really natural thing to do. I think for me, what we need every teacher, particularly in secondary school, to better understand is, how do children learn to read? Doesn't need to be excessive about that, but those building blocks, what are they? Because vocabulary, oral language, talk, you know, how you strategically, you know, kind of grapple with a complex sentence, how you use image, relate images to text, etc., etc. But I think it gets really important when you think about where do pupils struggle with reading? Where are the barriers? So what is it that makes a complex text in history? So let's take history. So whenever you're reading history, you're often reading historical sources. So they're archaic, that naturally the vocabulary, the language, the concepts are alien to pupils. So straight away, you've got a barrier of both knowledge and language. So much of like British history has got a language that attends, religion and Christianity and all of these aspects. And that's quite literally, they're relics. Those words and ideas are relics for most of our students. So there's a knowledge and language that is in the history curriculum. And then at the same time as trying to grapple with all that, background and historical periods, you also need to understand concepts like continuity, change, causation, all of these aspects. And then you've got to not just read a range of sources and evaluate and judge, then you've got to write about them. And reading and writing are two sides of the same coin. So whenever you're in the history classroom, you're absorbing and synthesizing and connecting this rich web of language. You're thinking about concepts. You're basically doing an act of translation, like when you're in Spanish or German and you're translating that language. Like when in English you're reading Shakespeare, you're always translating Shakespeare. That so much of his language is alien. And then in mathematics, you're translating that unique language of maths. And I think how you read is slightly different in all of those subjects, and yet some things are really common. So for me, I would say a senior leader, and others, source expertise, and ideally if it's in the school, fantastic, where you explore what are the common aspects of reading challenges. So vocabulary is one of them. So another one is when you're reading multiple texts with a lot of background knowledge, like in history, you're doing all the time. So you're exploring some of the common aspects of what makes reading hard. One of the things I often do with that is I get like different subject teachers reading a text from another subject, and we just black out some of the language. And we just make it stark that to read about Kolkata's civic infrastructure in geography is a really hard job, even for a teacher of art, never mind for a 14-year-old. And then you've got reading about Newtonian laws in physics. I find that really hard, frankly. And in science, that textbook doesn't just have the words, it has algebraic, kind of mathematics, it has diagrams, it has graphs, etc. And reading in science is this unique challenge. So I think it's valuable for every teacher to recognize the challenge of reading for a typical adolescent. The academic language of school is not the language of our daily talk. It's unique, it's specialized, it's complex. And we need to understand that challenge and feel like a novice again a little bit. So we recognize our pupils are always tackling that challenge. Then think about that from our subject lens. What are the unique challenges that we need to be more mindful of in the history classroom or the science classroom or English? And that's where I think it becomes a subject leader, middle leader, more of a challenge there, because I get asked to talk about disciplinary literacy, and I can give examples from across the curriculum, quite, just through experience, just through my research. However, you get an art teacher or you get a biology teacher, once you get past a few surface examples, then they're talking about topics on the curriculum that I know very little about. And they've got to think, okay, what do they know is really difficult about teaching osmosis? And what is it about that concept and how you read about it and how you talk about it that's uniquely hard? And that's where it's only middle leaders and subject teachers who bring enough knowledge to recognize what are the hard bits, where are the misconceptions, where might reading be extra tricky. Now, for me, you've got, again, some strategies that you can use across the curriculum. If you pre-teach vocabulary for science and you use a bit of, break the words down, photosynthesis, break it down into its parts, photo meaning light, etc. That's a useful way to access a chapter of the textbook. But then also you need to be really explicit about summarizing that chapter in the textbook, about using the scaffolds of the glossary and the keywords. You need to be really explicit about scanning for certain information. So there are certain reading strategies that you can pick up and use in science that you can use pretty similarly in history and English and maths. But again, there are some nuances. So in every lesson, teachers being explicit about how people skim and scan a text is a universal strategy. One that seems so obvious, we ignore it. But actually, for lots of our students, they could be 15, never mind, young, that they don't quite scan the text, they don't make quick judgments, they don't skim it and appraise the length of the text, what type of genre, what type of period in history it's covering, etc. So skimming and scanning you can use across the curriculum, but then there are some strategies that are really specific to the subject. So take mathematics. I don't think in mathematics you're reading in the same way as you're reading in history. You have to really carefully read and reread the question. And what you're looking for in the language is you're looking for the mathematical operations. So often one of the reading strategies is about reading and rereading, circling the keywords that are the kind of the operational words for the maths problem. That's quite a specific strategy. Then you move over to the history classroom and you're thinking in history about the source of what you're reading. You're thinking about the author. So you're sourcing. You're thinking about, right, is this a reliable source? Is it, a secondary source? Does this source fit in with the period and what I already know about it? Can I corroborate this source? So you're thinking about the author, that you're thinking about the reliability, you're thinking about period. You frankly don't think of any of that in science or mathematics. So it's about knowing what the general approaches to reading can be that are useful for everyone, skimming and scanning, vocabulary teaching, knowing that certain sentences are a bit more complex to understand because they're longer and they've got multiple parts. There's some general stuff, and then there's some real specific stuff that a history teacher can get their teeth into, a science teacher, a maths teacher. And frankly, my experience as an English teacher, where we're expected to be the experts in reading, ironically, is I went a good decade without knowing about reading comprehension strategies. I went a good decade without knowing about systematic vocabulary teaching. I went a good decade without understanding what are the causes of dyslexia and how might you support a pupil with dyslexia to read. How might you support a poor comprehender who can sound the words out but doesn't understand them very well? So I think we can often take for granted our level of understanding about reading. So there's lots of expertise in every school, but it's not evenly distributed. So you've got brilliant subject experts who wouldn't be confident with a struggling reader, and you've got primary school teachers who are amazing about those building blocks of reading, phonics, and developing reading comprehension, but they're not experts to the degree a science teacher. So they get to Key Stage 2 and reading changes again, and they can struggle. So for me, it's about that external expertise. It's about digging into this as a challenge, because I think it is a challenge. The evidence shows it. A quarter of all children in 2018 going into secondary school didn't meet the expected standard of reading. In GL assessments, where they give an appropriate reading age, again, a quarter of 15-year-olds have a reading age of 12. And when you see these kind of factors, well, if that's a quarter of all students in England, then that's pretty much all classrooms, isn't it? That some children are struggling to access the academic reading. And I think the issue is that, we come back to that word confidence. We're not quite confident about what to do with that problem. And in all honesty, again, it's another issue of we don't feel that comfortable talking about it either, because this is like happening in lots and lots of classrooms, and it's it's something we need to talk about, and it's something teachers need more support about.
Well, your book is incredibly insightful, and actually, you just reminded me of my sister was diagnosed as being dyslexic, but she didn't have that diagnosis until she was in university. It was picked up on, and then she saw in my book, Love to Teach, I wrote a section about put the popcorn away, about popcorn reading, and she flipped in my book and she said popcorn reading. And for anyone who doesn't know, that was, well, the strategy that I've seen called popcorn reading is where a student reads a section and then they go popcorn, Alex, pass the popcorn, and then Alex reads out loud, and then Alex passes the popcorn, passes the reading. So my sister saw this as an adult in my Love to Teach book and told me that when there was big issues for 1 year and she kept skiving English lessons. She got in a lot of trouble, she was missing English lessons, and it's because of the pop. She never told anyone why. She said she hated the teacher. She said, I hate him. And they were like, well, you still have to go to these lessons. But it was the popcorn reading that she would get this anxiety that someone would say, popcorn, Emily, and then she'd be asked to read on the spot, and she didn't publish it out loud, and she couldn't do that. And she didn't know she was dyslexic, and nobody else knew that. And she never said to my mum either, the reason I avoid these lessons is because he makes me read out loud. She said, I hate him, I don't like him. But it only took her years later for us to talk about that and for us to have this conversation about, wow, the impact of the strategies that we use. And again, it comes back to lots of the things that you said, and that is a perfect example with the confidence. So that's something that I found really interesting from a teacher, but also I had no idea about my sister feeling that way, someone who I'm really, really close to. But your books, by the way, closing. Oh, sorry, you go, Alex.
Yeah, I was just gonna, so just that as an example, I actually in the book do mention about different whole class reading strategies, and that popcorn reading, and it's got slightly different names, but we know it as basically a pupil being picked at random, either by the teacher mainly, but often by their peers as well. And there is that's a decision that happens in most classrooms most days. And yet it's a hidden problem. It was hidden even from your sister. It was hidden from her understanding of why it was such a problem. And actually, there are some easy solutions to it. One, don't use that strategy. Put simply, use a better strategy. So what your sister needed effectively was the teacher just having that understanding about her reading level and her confidence level around reading. But actually, what I would suggest is the answer is for her to never read aloud. The answer is for your sister to have that preparedness to know, that she's going to have to read a passage, but the teacher reads that with her. She's prepared for it. There might be a step before where your sister doesn't read in front of the class. Even the idea of preparing for it's not enough. That then she needs some fluency practice with a teacher, and you can do that really quickly in a couple of minutes. Or you could do whole class choral reading, or the teacher can model it and the teacher can have 5 minutes with your sister every couple of weeks just working on how you read a sentence or sentences fluently. And this is it's almost a perfect example, your sister's example there, around reading is about the fabric of teaching every single day, and it's so part of the fabric that we can't even see it. It's like it's like the wallpaper. It's just faded into the background. And when you see it, when you've got a bit more of that expertise, and hopefully the book helps, you actually start to see all those choices happening through the school day, and you make better choices as a teacher. And that that example of just how emotional that impact is on your sister. Again, often our seemingly small classroom choices, decisions we make as teachers, they really, really matter. And usually they matter in a brilliant way, but they unlock the curriculum. Your sister becomes a fluent, skilled reader, and then in a wider life, maybe she's not reading aloud, but she's able to speak to groups of people. And all of that skill and opportunity that reading unlocks. And it can come right down to making really small decisions daily. It's not some big, we're going to do this big intervention and everything's going to be fixed and here's your silver bullet, guys. It is a teacher in a classroom, a little bit overworked, a little bit harried, but making good decisions because they've been supported to better understand how you read really well.
Oh, I will tell my sister that we've had this conversation because all the impact, isn't it? The strategies, the better techniques, as you said. We had John Hattie on, and he said it's not what works, it's what works best. And that's, what you're sharing, all these strategies. I was going to say as well, your books, because I know lots of teachers love Audible, and there's not many books, but yours are Closing the Gap books are on Audible. I was so disappointed that you're not the narrator. You should be, Alex. John Telfer is very good, by the way, but I've
heard it's really hard. I've heard it's really hard to do the voiceover. So.
Oh, well, see, for me, because I'm in Abu Dhabi and books can take a long time, Audible's instant. So whilst I love to have a physical copy of the book, sometimes I'm too impatient. So I have the vocabulary book. I've tweeted a picture of that with my coffee this morning. And I've got Closing the Reading Gap on my phone, Audible. So we've talked for 90 minutes and I feel like I could still ask you so many more questions. And I've learned so much from you throughout my career, and a big thank you for being a guest today, but also a big thank you for your books, your inspiration, your insight, for helping me become a better and more confident teacher. Did you like that?
There you go. I like that. Excellent. Skilled.
I think that's the close in there. But people can listen back to this podcast, and I would encourage people, if you do have questions for Alex. Interestingly enough, Alex, I think someone asked me to ask you this. You're Hunting English. You haven't gone Alex EEF yet. Are you changing your Twitter handle, or are you going to keep it forever?
It's like, so I changed my website address from Hunting lots of people who were following the original website, etc. So I've just got frightened of changing anything. So it feels like people must look at it now and go, what the hell is that about? I get on Twitter every other day, I get American hunting enthusiasts follow me on Twitter, which is random. But I don't have the confidence to change it.
Well, I changed it because I used to be 87 History, I hated it. And then I have 87 History and I say, follow Kate Jones Teach. So, and David Dido changed it from The Learning Spy, and Tom Sherrington was Guru, and now he's Teacher Head. So, I mean, I'm sure John Thompson likes you. You've still got the connection to Huntington there. But I just wanted to share that. So if you do want to get in touch directly with Alex, obviously at Hunting English, and his website, theconfidentteacher.com, and his brilliant books of the work with the EEF. So there's lots of places for people to explore your book. So once more, thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Have a lovely day.
Yeah, me too. You too. Bye, Alex. And thank you, everyone else, for listening today. Bye. And I will be back next week with my special guest, Andrea Zafriakou. So please do not miss that. Listen live or listen later. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.